Finally, comprehension is the last skill on my list, and this is also vitally important. But like I said about grammar, detailed, explicit explanation should be avoided, at least at first. Looking for direct translations from elementary-aged children simply will not work for the majority of students. The focus should be on eliciting responses from the children and motivating them to think about what it seems like the passage is saying, rather than giving them the one set answer, which it seems like they must adjust to. Anyone who has done any work in translation knows that that is not how translation is done anyway. Motivating them to engage the meaning personally will be far more useful to them in tackling new and unfamiliar texts. Reading content should be integrated with the communicative component of the syllabus. They can build on and feed off each other. And with the communicative syllabus, just as with the reading program, the children should be encouraged to understand what it is they are learning. Developing rote responses to fixed questions is the antithesis of communicative methodology, regardless of how much it sounds like they are communicating. Change things up, challenge their ability to solve puzzles. After all, that is what language fundamentally is, a very intricate puzzle. To help them to code that puzzle, use accurate visual representation of the text to help your students clear hurdles of unfamiliar vocabulary or grammar. This is a deviation from pure synthetic phonics, but we have to consider that our students don't have the linguistic resources available to a native speaker. I think that in this sense, certain whole language method teaching practices can sometimes help us to mediate that gap. But this is only true when applied to the comprehension aspect of reading. Learning how to systematically decode the alphabetic system is still vital to being able to develop that eventual acquisition. And even when grammatical words may be unclear in meaning, students must be encouraged to read them. It is only in this way that through repeated exposure, they can come to learn what those words represent. Now, I'd like to briefly present how we introduce these skills in NESA, and hopefully we'll have some time to talk about activities and materials before I take some questions. In the first grade, we start off introducing the lowercase alphabet and familiarizing the students with letter names. This involves both visual and auditory letter recognition. They also do letter tracing, or forming letter shapes with their hands or their bodies. Grammar is implicitly introduced through the learning of simple functional phrases like how are you and what's your name. At this stage, the emphasis is on responding to questions appropriately and acquiring some basic vocabulary and familiarity with the spoken language, rather than on strictly accurate production ability. In second grade, we recycle most of the content while introducing new conversational material. The reading aspect introduces uppercase letters, and practice begins to involve copying activities. Some examples of some activities that we would have here. Like for first grade, we would start with maybe just simple alphabet songs, because part of our program is we want to teach letter recognition first. That's the basic ABCs. So teach them alphabet songs. Although we don't just teach them to sing the song, I always make sure that we have a written representation of the song that they can see, whether it's on the board or a poster or something. Because if otherwise it's just remembering a nonsense song. They don't necessarily know if these sounds A, B, C, D have a connection to the letters at all. So as long as there's a visual representation, you can maybe move along with them. Then they're learning the alphabet as they're singing. Hand gestures, we also use those, like Mr. Bugs Phonics has a very interesting set of hand gestures for doing the lowercase alphabet. And we start the lowercase alphabet in first grade first because we find that the first character set that they learn is the one they tend to default to when they're having problems. And when they learn the uppercase first, it means that they're writing mainly in uppercase letters for a long time. You have to undo that habit. But if we start them off with the lowercase, then they start using predominantly lowercase letters, which is how written English actually is. So we find that it's better for the long term to do that. Also, uppercase letters, as they learn to use computers in their native language, they just acquire that naturally. And they don't need as much support in the teaching environment. Lowercase letters are rarer in their daily exposure, so we try to give them more. Backwriting is another useful activity in first grade. What that is, basically, the kids have a line, form a line, like sort of like a telephone game, ding-bong game, or grapevine, depending on what you call it. And in this case, the teacher goes around and writes a letter on the back of the last student. And then they think about what's the shape, and they try to reproduce it on this child in front of them, and so on until the first kid either says the letter, or maybe picks the letter off the board, depending on what level they're at. Some examples of second grade activities, and most of these activities should be in your handouts too. I'll just explain it. This is what happened here. Second grade. One of the activities I find is really successful is a magic finger. What that is basically you just have like a big card with a letter on it, or maybe written on the board. And you make a big production of it. So get your magic fingers ready, and everybody gets their finger ready, and then you trace the letter in the air slowly, and while making some sound perhaps, even using the phonetic sound to give them an implicit introduction to phonics might be a good idea. And everybody moves it together, and you tell them they move their finger fast enough they can see it in front of their eyes. You know, it's like, and you'll see kids trying to do it and say, "Oh yeah, you really can," and you really like it. I also started introducing letter recognition coloring sheets. These could be anything that sort of gets them to learn without learning. Like you have, like one thing I use is you have a big picture, like a coloring sheet, and you have like the letters concealed within that sheet, and they have to find them and color them a certain letter. So when they find them, oh, and then they're coloring the letter a certain color, so they're practicing writing the letter, but they don't realize that's what they're doing. Whereas if you just gave them a practice sheet for the letters, they would probably throw it in the trash. But like, if you give them a coloring sheet and say, find all the bees, and then they race each other to find the bees, and then they color in the bees, and then they've got practice writing and recognizing the letter at the same time. Another useful activity I find is the Japanese game of Karata, which, in case you're not familiar with it, it's just a game where you have a bunch of cards on the table, and the teacher says something, and they basically grab the card first. But you can do that with letters as well, and that gives them extra practice in discriminating letters from each other. Continuing with third grade, in the third grade, there's an explosion of skills here, because this is the start of our phonics program proper. This means that phonemic awareness skills, blending, and some chunking are introduced in step with their progression through the first readers and the reading regimen. The students can consequently also begin to be exposed to written grammar through these stories, although implicitly. It's still not explicitly explained unless we get direct questions. Fourth grade continues the sequence while introducing some more emphasis on segmenting sounds and emphasizing some more explicit phonemic awareness skills. Some examples, some activities we use in third grade. Like one, cards again comes up. Except this time we use sounds. Like, for instance, we say the sound of the letter. But to give children with different achievement levels an opportunity to still be involved in the game, I would often use, I would say three things. I would say the sound of the letter, then an example word with the letter at the front, and then the name of the letter, so that they would have a chance. So I would say, like, for A, I would say apple, A, and then they could grab it at any point in there, as soon as they recognize which letter I'm talking about. The fly swatter game is the same basic things that is on the board, and they have fly swatters or something that they can use to hit the board and select the correct letter. The fly swatter game is more of a group and class activity, where all the classes focusing on one set of cards, and sound card is more divided into groups, more individually monitored. Starting simple decodable picture books. Some dictation activities you can also do. Reading as a class, those are also good initial activities to get them used to the idea of reading. Things like the bingo song, taking traditional children's songs, sort of changing them to emphasize the phonics component. Like I said, like there was a farmer who had a dog, and bingo was his name, Bookie Unga, oh, Bookie Unga. So you can break it up like that, and they can still enjoy it. Fourth grade, we might do more stories. We might move on to something like dictation, which is where I give them a word that they don't know. I pick a word that they intentionally do not know at all, but that is phonetic, based on the letters they know. I would read that, and they would try to think of which sounds go into that word, and then try to write the word. And then we would correct it as a class, and they would learn to think about breaking words into sounds like that. Hangman is a useful activity, and it can be done in a similar manner to full dictation, like that you can tell them the answer first, and then they try to hit the letters afterwards. Once they get better at that, of course, though, it's probably best to leave the secret. Word finds are also a good way to help develop vocabulary and reinforce their letter recognition skills.